I have my son who's passing out the letters, and I apologize. I did not think there would be this many people want a good message. I thought we were filled with depressed people that wanted to blame others. I like the topic. How many of you like the topic, good guys always win? Oh. Okay. Now, what I have is a form letter, which is the standard here. But before I go into that, we need to go through the pecking order. How many of you are over 90, by show of hands? Well, as long as I'm the only one that's 6 months into my 90th year, I want to explain to you the pecking order. The pecking order is that the oldest man is the wisest man. How many of you agree? No question about that. Okay. Now, how many of you can recognize a good guy when you see him?
Where's the white hat?
This guy on the front row knows the answers to everything, but he also knows the one. Back in my days, when they first started movies, I was never disappointed because, you know, I could go to the movie and I knew who the good guy was. He always wore a white hat. And he always won. He always won. And he always got the girl. Who are you? I think this hoo-ah down here is Joe Wallach. How many of you know Joe Wallach? Oh, give him a hand. He's going to change the world. Joel is. Now, this piece of machinery up here is called technology. And I am back in the smoke signal days, but let's see what happens. Look at that. If I had known this 15 years ago, I'd have been here 15 years ago. Here's the key to how you and I are going to make sure that the good guys win this battle. Number one key is you learn from the past. You have to learn from the past. Number two, you have to prepare for the future. That's what we're doing here at this meeting. And number three, you have to live in the present. I was shocked when I learned recently that a poll found out that more than half of the U.S. citizens believe that a nation's best days are in the past. How many of you agree with that poll? How many of you don't? How many of you don't know what you think? I see a lot of horizontal votes. This is a terrible, terrible, terrible pessimistic view. You know, as one who's grown up always knowing that the next year was going to be better and that our best years were in the future, to think that half of the nation doesn't even believe that anymore. It's like they've lost hope. I know that our best days are in the future. I know that we will win this battle that we're in. I know it. Why? If you had to pick a person and you said, okay, let's see what your battle record is. I've got a battle record. Let's see if this goes one more. Look at that. Learning from the past. How many of you don't know me by show of hands? Make sure you know me before you leave the meeting. Make sure you come up and meet me. Because we decisively won the medical quackery war by declaring war ourselves and focusing national attention on the medical monopoly. Now, it was a question of words. Once people understand the terminology, we win. It's because people get confused with terminology that we lose. The American Medical Association in 1960 had put together one of the most powerful, brilliant plans to destroy this movement. Now, I'm over 50 years ago, And I had just been sent to Washington, D.C. as the legislative advocate for the National Health Federation. They had Congress on medical quackery, and I was thrilled to death because everybody knew that medical quackery was rampant. And when the Congress was held, the first one was held in 1961, they didn't look at medical quackery at all. All they looked at was at this industry, and I'm speaking of this industry, the broadest aspect is the advance of the health foods industry and the alternative integrative unit. They recognized that if they didn't destroy it in the crib, if they didn't destroy this movement as it was just starting, it would grow and it would be them or us. And that's exactly where it is now. They know it's either them or us. And I know how this is going to turn out. We're right, they're wrong. Guys are the bad guys. What we did then was, I think, very clever. We were a smaller group by far than the national unit is now. I think we've got single companies. Joel Wallach has a company that's much larger than we were back in those days. We had about 3,000 health food stores. He's approaching 1 million distributors. We had some very brave people who had been beat up by the Food and Drug Administration at the behest of the American Medical Association. And they called me and they said, would you like to put on a Congress on medical monopoly? And I said, that sounds like exactly what I left my home state for, came back to Washington for, and we put on the first National Congress on medical monopoly. The press ate it up. When I went back there, I was told that the press is not on our side. I was told that the Washington Post would never carry our story. The Washington Post loved us because we gave them a battle, a real battle between two very clear things. Is it medical quackery or is it medical monopoly? We got a medical doctor, Dr. Miles Robinson, to chair our meeting. He was a brilliant medical doctor. At our conference, we had the #1 dissenter of the Federal Trade Commission. We had doctors, lawyers, attorneys, all of whom knew what the truth was. They held their second Congress on medical quackery at the Sheraton Park Hotel, and they had their usual 2,000 people there, most of whom were paid for, employees of the federal government getting paid to come to their conference. We had ours at the more prestigious Sheraton Carlton Hotel, which was gorgeous but very small. And when we started, there was nobody in our meeting at the press table. I had set up a beautiful press table at the side, and nobody was there. And I was crushed because I thought, you know, we've put out press releases, they know what this battle's about, we got some nice advanced publicity, and suddenly, about a half hour into the first speaker, from the back of the room, in walked the press that I'd been working with for a year. In came the Washington Post, and came Associated Press, and came United Press International, and I thought, how come they all come together? Well, what is one of the great miracles, and I'll tell you this happens over and over again once you're in this battle. We get miracles over and over and over again, and if you don't plan on them, you won't be prepared for them. At that time, the chair of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration stood up and made the biggest goof that he'd ever made in his life. He said to the press, whatever you do, don't go to the conference, which is being held at the same time. Now the press was sitting there, they'd already seen the press releases, they were exactly as had been 2 years before in 1961, and they woke up and they said, where's that we're not supposed to go? How many of you have people that are reporters, know anything in the press? You tell a press person where they're not supposed to go, they can smell it. And they got up as a unit, and they walked over to our convention, they left them unit. And we got the press that you couldn't buy for millions and millions of dollars. They cast us in the role of David. They cast them in the role of Goliath. They said the battle was going on in Washington, and then they gave the content of our speakers. Now, you have a form letter. This is standard every time I talk. Have you already signed them? How many of us already signed them? He already knows. He's to sign all three. Now, on the one of them, we have at the side of it your own personal comments. That's on purpose so that we make sure that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has to acknowledge in their regulatory process. Be sure you write that on the side. But sign all letters, and the minute you get all of them signed, hold them up, and my son will pick them up from you. Very important. Yes, all of them. Now, even the one that says you give all your property to me. But just sign it quickly. Sign all three. Okay. Now, one of the things that I think is important, and it's so important, you know, I really believe in good physical nutrition. I believe in all the good foods. I think that's important. But I think that if we don't feed ourselves spiritually, we die. We need constant nourishment to the spirit and to the body. And as I grew up, I was fed daily about the great people in this country that had built this country into the greatest country in the world. And one of my favorite stories was about John Paul Jones. How many of you know the story of John Paul Jones? How many of you don't? How many of you are ashamed that you don't? All right. John Paul Jones, I want you to go home and look it up, read about him, and then teach your children and your grandchildren about John Paul Jones. I'll tell you what he was. He was an Englishman, born in England, went for a while. He went in the Navy at the age of 18. And at a very young age, he became, let me read this. His heroism in fighting against a larger and better equipped British fleet established a tradition which has never been forgotten. His reply to a British demand to surrender has never been forgotten. And this is what he went in, and this is when you go to Annapolis, every sailor that we ever puts out, give up, never, I have not yet begun to fight. The background for that is that we were in the Revolutionary War. England had been the master of the oceans for over 100 years, ever since Spain had lost the Spanish Armada in a massive storm, and England ruled the waves. The difference between England and the rest of the world was almost vertical. And they built huge ships with 60 cannons. They had gunpowder in those days. Do you know what the ships were made of back in the Revolutionary days? Who knows what they were made of? Wood. Now, would you like to be on a wooden ship facing a battleship with 60 cannon ready to shoot at you at close range? And that's what they did. They shot at each other in wooden ships. Now, we struggled to get one little small ship into the hands of John Paul Jones, sent it over, and a lot of people thought it was to defend our coast. No, the minute John Paul Jones got into that ship, guess where he went? He went straight for England. He went over there to attack the English people in England. He began to go up and down the shores of England, and he terrorized the people because they would see John Paul's little ship there, and they would think, well, here come the pirates. And that was back in the days when they had pirates and they would raid. Well, the thing I love best about it is that here this massive fleet is there. John was for the #1 flagship. He pulls right up next to it. They shoot it out. And John Paul's ship is sinking because it only took a couple of blasts, and his ship was on the way down. And so the British admiral taunts him, and he says, "Do you give up?" And that's when we have this great statement. He says, "Give up never. I have not yet begun to fight." Now, I taught this to my children, my son, my #2 sons here. I had 4, and I taught it to them because I think this is one of the spirits. This is the spiritual food we need to eat every day, to know that we never give up. The reason that good guys are going to always win is because we never give up. If you never give up, the battle is you've either won it or it's still going on. And as I was having breakfast one morning, my wife, And we had at that time 4 very hungry boys. And she was making their bread as fast as she could. And the faster she would make them, the faster they would eat it. And so finally in desperation, she said, "Won't you please give up?" And my oldest boy stood up with boysenberry juice dripping from his knife, and he says, "Give up? Never. I've just begun to eat." Now, how do we prepare for the future? We prepare for the future by doing exactly what we've done 2 times in the past. 2 times in the past, we've done exactly the same thing we're doing here. We prepare by teaching Congress. We happen to live not in a monarchy. We live in a republic. And it's the only government in the world where you can write to Congress and each person can educate their congressman. I have a different view than the rest of the United States. I hear this low rating that people give to Congress. I don't share that. I ran for Congress. I ran for the U.S. Senate. And I met some of the people who were running against me, and every one of magnificent people. Their wives were magnificent. Their families were magnificent. We elected the best people that we could from our state, and you do from your state. Now, in many cases, they listen to a different drummer. People say, "Well, you're living in a la-la land, Clinton." I know. Politically, I have my strong convictions. I'm to the far right of Genghis Khan. I consider myself a conservative, but I have that some of my strongest advocates for health freedom are as far left as you can get. Tom Harkin of Iowa is as liberal as you can get. And when we got both Tom Harkin of Iowa, as liberal as you can get, together with Orrin Hatch, as far right as you could get, together they passed DSHEA. How many of you know what DSHEA is? DSHEA is that exhibit hall is filled with people that are selling dietary supplements. If it weren't for DSHEA, we would not have the right to sell vitamins and minerals. DSHEA simply said to Congress simply said to the Food and Drug Administration, you cannot limit the potency or combination of vitamins or minerals for any other reason than that are intrinsically injurious at the recommended dosage that you're giving. Well, none of our vitamins were toxic at that recommended dosage. I remember back in 1962, they tried to make a big thing about the toxicity of vitamin D. And they said anybody who's taking 400 units of vitamin D is foolish. Well, in the last 10 years, we found out that there's a massive worldwide, and certainly United States-wide, and certainly in the black community-wide deficiency of vitamin C. And they're talking about vitamin D deficiency. They're talking about D in potencies of 1,000, 2,000, and as high as 10,000 units of vitamin D besides making sure you get the sunshine. Now, to look at the present, we should all be anxiously engaged in a health freedom in a health freedom cause. To be anxiously engaged does not mean that you spend your whole time in it. It simply means you take the time. When we pass out a form letter, you sign it. How long does it take you to sign it 3 times? You pass it back in. I give it to members of Congress. We've done this before. This isn't something that I'm talking about to be invented. We did it back in 1976. Now, the first bill was passed when we got William Proxmire of Wisconsin, Senator Proxmire, and we got Craig Hosmer of Long Beach, California, in the House. And they introduced a bill, a 2-page bill, not these 2,000-page bills we talk about today. Everybody could read it and understand it. And it simply said that the AMA and the FDA could not do what they were trying to do, which was to destroy the health food industry by limiting vitamin and mineral potencies to any product that was not efficacious. Now, I have a code, and it says when you've been warned, you should warn your neighbor. It doesn't take much to warn your neighbor. We have these extra form letters. I want you to make copies of them. I want you to make them. It only costs a dime or a penny, depending on how. Then you do exactly the same thing I'm doing. We did it before. And what we did before, back in the 60s and 70s, every health food store you'd go into had my form letters on the counter, and they were mom and pop health food store. Be sure to sign this letter, and then I'll wait on you. And during that period of time, we got more mail into Congress on the Proxmire bill than they got on anything else except the Vietnam War or Watergate. We did it with just people like you who come and said, look, I can certainly do this. The other day I got a nice little package from somebody who had come to one of my meetings, and it was 29 letters which she had signed and copied and signed and sent to me. Now, we also have an obligation to extend our lives. How many of you are here to extend your life? I am. I really believe that we can extend our life into the 3 digits. And I've got my friend Joe Wallach down here said, if you die before 120, he says, I'll kill you. I think we need to share our health testimony with others, and we now have a new bill that will be introduced by Ron Paul the minute we go back into Congress. Ron Paul, when he introduces this bill, it's the health testimonial bill, and when you say it, you're going to say, this is going to be more powerful than either the Proxmire bill or DeShay. It simply says that anybody, any company, any multi-level company can publish testimonials, health testimonials, without them being regulated as a drug claim. Right today, anytime a small company puts out in their advertising true tests about what people are really saying about their product, and you hear them here over the platform, they now know that we're so low profile that it doesn't make any difference what they allow here. But wait till you see this bill pass, and then companies like Amway and Longevity and Nature Sunshine and these marvelous companies, they come out and they say, this is what people had with the results they have with our product. How many of you believe we can cure cancer? I know it, because for 30 years I've had cancer. And over again I've come back here. First I cured my skin cancer, and then I cured my prostate cancer. And it was because I came to this marvelous meeting, thanks to thanks to Lorraine and Frank. Let's see, one more. How many of you believe Monopoly is a harmless board game? I was brought up in the Depression. In the Depression, we didn't have TV. We played Monopoly. And you could buy it, and you'd play it, and we'd sit around and we'd play Monopoly, and I was taught that Monopoly was a harmless board game. I'm sorry to use this kind of language before such lovely people, but Monopoly is one of the dirtiest words that you can use. Monopoly is one of the most evil things that a person can do. Monopoly is the way in which you have tyranny in a nice suit with people that go to Yale and Harvard, and they say, okay, here's the way you have it. Monopoly is evil. It is evil. It is evil. And we've got Jonathan Emord that's now giving us a new word, and he says it's an oligarchy. Now, we don't teach that word anymore, but oligarchy is a form of government in which the power is vested in a few. I grew up in a government where the power of the government was invested in me. We all ran the government. A medical oligarchy is the #1 cause of death in America. #1. More deaths are caused by people falling into that system than anything else. Now, the Food and Drug Administration are controlled by America's medical oligarchy monopoly. And the reason that they do it is that they have a definition of a drug which is so all-encompassing. It says that a drug is anything that is used to treat, prevent, or cure a disease. How many of you take treat, prevent, or cure a disease? Every time you do that, you're taking a drug according to the, and if people use foods that way, they're selling drugs. Now, I have this as far as longevity is concerned. My great-grandfather, Jacob, died at 83. He came from Germany. His father, or his son, my grandfather, died at 67 with cancer. That was a loss of 8 years. My father died at 59 with a stroke. 83 to 67 to 59. In 3 generations, we lost 8 years per generation, and I figured out when I was very smart in college that I would die at 51. My youngest brother died right on schedule. I do not want to be killed by Joe Wallach. I'm going to do everything I can to live to be over 100. But here's where I want you to share a little bit of responsibility. Down there and over here, these exhibitors have things that will help me live here. When the minute you get something, you say, Clinton needs to know about this, you say, just a minute, I'm going to tell this to Clinton. Bring it back to me, and I'll do it. I'm an easy sell. I want to know that you will live with me for 10 more years if possible. And in doing so, I hope you'll sign every form letter we get out to you, because once new legislation passes, you will pass on to our children and my children more freedom and more happiness than we've had because of the wonderful Bill of Rights that's given us the right to have any religion we want, and then we'll be able to have any health care we want. Thank you very much.